Greetings! It's I, BlazeLeeDragon again, and I have another video response for you. This video response is to actually a comment that I like a lot. This is actually one of the coolest comments that I've got because it's very direct, straightforward, and it's going to be a very difficult one for me to answer a comment on. So, the comment on my video is, the name of the video is Response to Self. Oh, it should be myself. Haha. Response to self, why using title which is stupid. And this is to elaborate further based upon this individual's comments. So the individual is Nice Linguist. If I'm mispronouncing your name, once again, I apologize. That's my attempt to pronounce it. And the comment is, thanks for sharing. I'd like to understand your opinion better, because it seems to have some weight to it. So I'd like to make a suggestion. It might be useful if you could make a positive, standalone definition of what you think a witch is, as opposed to defining it in its opposition to something. As an example, he puts witchcraft versus Wicca, or in the negative, witchcraft is not ... That can make it easier to understand. And you know, Nice Linguist, you're absolutely right. It would make it easier to understand. Now, here's the problem with that. It's not going to be possible. And why is it not going to be possible? So, this is going to be a little bit of a long video, potentially. Let's see how it goes, because I'm doing all my videos on the spur of the moment, whatever I feel like saying. Here's the issue with witch and witchcraft. It's very, 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 very difficult to define. Also, my ability to define it is going to be extremely limited because I'm not a witch. And my knowledge of witchcraft is extremely limited. Thus, the issue that I had, so I made the video, calling yourself a witch is stupid because, and I have always had issues with just having the term thrown around. So let me go into a little bit of background and why, and let's lead up to what I personally think a witch is, which shouldn't hold much weight with you as a viewer. Any of you. What I think a witch is irrelevant because I'm not a witch, so it's an outside observation. Your best bet is to talk to someone who is a witch. So the reason it's so hard to determine, well, what is a witch, what is witchcraft, is kind of like taking Catholicism versus Protestantism, I believe is the proper term for a Protestant. Protestant's faith. So, you have a Catholic with Catholicism, and you have a Protestant with Protestantism. So what's the difference? Why is it that a Protestant can't call themselves Catholic and vice versa? Now, someone who is a Protestant or a Catholic could answer this better. Once again, I'm not either. I've studied a little bit of both, but very little. So once again, my knowledge and I wouldn't say I have expertise on anything. I just have opinions, and that's why I always tell you this is my opinion. This is how, based upon my research that I've done and what I think. So I'm telling you again, this is my opinion. When you have a Protestant and you have a Catholic and you take it down, so what makes a Catholic? They believe in God. That fits for a Protestant too. They believe in the Bible. Fits for both. They have priests. Fit for both. They go to church on Sundays, fits for both. They follow the 10 Commandments, fits for both. So, what is the defining factor that separates them? It's subtle, and it's one or two little things, but on a whole, they're very, 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 very similar faiths. And that's going to be the case with a lot of things. You're going to have similarities, so there's going to be a muddled line of differentiation between the two. However, if you call a Protestant a Catholic, some will take great offense to it. Most of them will correct you. Vice versa, if you call a Catholic a Protestant, they're going to want to correct you. They consider it to have a big difference. It gets even worse if you fall into some traditions or practices that are way different. Let me give you an example. Jehovah's Witness. Calling a Jehovah's Witness a Catholic. Their structure is a lot different, even though the essential base of the faith is very similar. Some of the primary things that separate Jehovah's Witness from some of the other monotheists out there is the fact that they don't celebrate any holidays. It also They don't have priests, they have elders, if I understand correctly. Once again, not an expert. You could talk to Jehovah's Witness, get a little more information on that. Then you have other individuals. Oh, here's a really good example. The Mormons. And the Mormons, although they fit into a lot of those other monotheistic faiths as well, stereotypically speaking, most of them are very open to talking about and accepting of others, but that's more of a personality trait, and it doesn't necessarily involve the whole. So you'll have individuals who will change what your opinion, impression, or definition is of any path. The other thing, that reason I mentioned the Mormons being a good one, is there's this huge rumor about polygamy, blah, 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 multiple spouses. That's not condoned by the Mormon faith. But I think that there is one group of polygamists, can't pronounce the name right, that so happen to also call themselves Mormon, thus the Mormons get a bad rap for it. Stuff like that is why I'm taking issue with the term witch being thrown around so freely. Once you start throwing it around and you get stereotypes incorporated in with it, you start muddling what the definition is. You start muddling what it is that makes that individual. Just because an individual includes other practices, now you're starting to broaden the term and you're starting to get confused on what it is. And that's what I'm leaning up into. That's my whole point. This is still involved with witchcraft, and what is witchcraft? Is this differentiating between similar paths. So, once again, let's go with Catholicism, just because it seems to be very popular. Would you consider someone a Catholic who does not go to church, does not believe in God, does not follow the Bible, and doesn't follow the Ten Commandments, or believe in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, as I think the way it is for them? Would you consider them Catholic? What if they call themselves Catholic? So, if someone's not fitting the defining factors, so let's take it a step further. Let's say the individual does all of that, but they don't believe in the Bible. Or let's say they follow all of that, they do all of that, but they don't believe that there's one God. What is it that would eventually, when is enough enough? Where's the limit? Where's the threshold? And it's on an individual basis. And that's why I told in my other videos that I don't care if someone calls themselves a witch. I'm not telling you not to call yourself a witch. I'm presenting these to you to open your mind, to broaden it, to really consider and think, what path are you following, why are you following it, and are you actually following it? I don't know. I've said it before in my other videos, I'm nothing special. I'm not a doctor or a historian or a sage, maybe a self-proclaimed historian because I like to study, but I'm nothing special. I'm not a professor. I'm no one of consequence. I'm a random guy who, lives in Ohio that just, sits here and rattles off in front of a webcam. And I do it because the 17 years I took studying and researching and reading books, I wasn't able to get answers very easily. I had to dig to find a lot of that stuff. And most of the stuff that I have is, it might be true. And so I'm trying to share some of the footsteps I took so that you can use them as stepping stones. Not to use them as a biblical reference and write it down and etch it in stone. So, going back to my point, because I get sidetracked a lot, and like I said, this might be a longer video. Witchcraft and witch. First of all, I used references that were religious, just because there's some spirituality involved. Witchcraft is not a religion, and that's going to piss off some people, especially witches who so happen to be religious as well. Now, witchcraft is almost always associated with religion, but it's not necessarily religion. Very similar to celebrating the holidays. A lot of people do Christmas and have nothing to do with the Christian side of it. So is somebody who's an atheist who does Christmas, are they Christian because they do Christmas? You see what I'm saying? So there's not necessarily, between practice and actual faith and belief, they're not, And with witchcraft, it's almost always associated with some form of polytheistic earth-based beliefs, whether that be a completely separate religion or it's their own personal path that just so happens to meld with their family style of witchcraft. Thus, to an outside appearance, and for all intents and purposes, that family tradition might be religious, but the essence of what witchcraft is itself, it is not religious. So that's part of the definition. Witchcraft is not religious in itself. though it's very religious friendly. Now, why do I call it not religious? Because it is spiritual. And what's the difference between spirit and religion? The main difference, and once again, my definition and my impression, is that spirituality has to do with personal path, personal beliefs, where religion is more set in a box, and it's more structured, and this is how it is, and this is how it has to be, and it's given by these higher-ups and these priests, such as Wicca. Now, do a lot of Wiccans practice witchcraft? Sure. That's another thing that has been muddling all this and kind of gets my goat, and why I'm making a lot of these negative-like videos, is because once again, like the Mormons, there's one group who did polygamy, they assume all of them. Just because there's one group of witches who so happen to be Wiccan as well does not make all witches Wiccans. They're not synonyms for each other. They usually fall hand in hand, but I know tons of witches who aren't Wiccans. Now, I wouldn't say tons, but I know witches who are not Wiccans. And I've had quite a few respond and post comments and personal messages. So, witch. The term itself, where does it come from? Who can honestly tell me where it comes from? Don't give me this rattling off bullshit about how, oh, well, it came from, the Anglo-Saxon word Wicca and Wicca. Fuck that shit. You haven't even heard... That whole origin of the word witch is something that has popped up recently. You didn't used to hear that. All of a sudden it came out of nowhere, out of Old English. First of all, the term witch was used in a lot more regions than the Germanians and Anglo-Saxons and all Germania and all that kind of area in there. And also, the term applied to people way before that time period as well, even back to one of the theorized origins of witchcraft and witches was what's left of the Druid faith. So you have all these practices and teachings in Druidry, which is why a lot of witches and Wiccans and others today try to celebrate the Wheel of the Year, which happened all over. It wasn't just necessarily just religious. It was a tribal community thing that many people had. But it is believed that the witches today, or at least one group of the witches, were what's remnants of the Druid faith. That's one potential origin. But we don't have a concrete origin. And most words and practices and things like that, we don't have concrete origins with. This one. And you know what I like. So give me that. My wife's asking for food. She's interrupting, but she's being quiet. But the pause. I have to explain the pause. So where was I? So witches. Origin. So that's the first issue I have, is we don't know the 100% official origin of witch or witchcraft. And then you have different versions and different, traditions in the world and different family traditions. So you start getting something muddled there. When you start slapping out books with what you think witchcraft is, with no training and no teachings to back it up or have a history or a lineage, then you start taking and having it mean nothing. And that's why I started those couple videos about more reasons why I started those couple videos of why it's stupid to call yourself a witch, because what's the meaning behind the word? What makes you a witch? Are you a witch because you read a book? Are you a witch because you've done something that you were told is witchcraft? Where's the weight behind it? If I write a random book and say that this is witchcraft, does that etch it in stone? What makes these authors so special? Where did they get their knowledge? Where's their resources? Where's their history knowledge? And if it's not written down in history, a lot of people say, well, it doesn't have to be written down in history. You're right, because if it's passed by word of mouth, there's your lineage, there's your being taught, there's something traditional. Same thing with like Catholicism. People are supposed to go to church. Why don't they just pick up the Bible and read it at home? Are they a Catholic if they do that? Technically, they can call themselves that, but then you're, a self-Bible study student at home. That's why you have all these break off religions off of Catholicism and denominations. The same thing's happening with witchcraft. You learn a couple things that are associated with witchcraft, and automatically, oh, I'm a witch, which is fine. And I'm going to get into my definition of what I think a witch is towards the end. All of this data and what I'm saying right now is part of this answer, and I think it weighs very heavily on some of the things that I have to say and some of the videos that I'm making. So I think it's important that you take the time to listen to this before I get into my definition. Let me give you another example of another thing. And like I said, I chose witch just because it's so popular. Witch is being thrown around like freaking crackers. And, you know, crackers are pretty common. You have them with your soup, you have them at the dinner table, saltines left and right, and soup crackers and oyster crackers and all kinds of stuff. Crackers are very common, and that's what they're doing with the title witch. It's no longer a title. It's a label that people are slapping on anything that has to do with polytheism. And that, you know, I personally kind of have a bit of a pet peeve with that. So I'm not going to... Don't stop calling yourself a witch because of this video or anything I say, because what I say is irrelevant. You know what you are. If you know you're a witch, who the fuck am I to tell you you're not? I mean, seriously, I'm some random guy making a video. You know, you just pass by and watch it. If you know what you are, don't question yourself. I'm just trying to put out there my opinion, and since I was asked, let's go into some further detail. Let me give you another one that kind of is a pet peeve for me. Shaman. What are the Native American... Okay. People call them Indians. People with red skin, feather, stereotype, tomahawk. They call them Indians. I don't know why. Actually, I do know why, because Christopher Columbus is a fucking moron and nobody decided to correct it. Indians are people from India. But anyway, what do you call the spiritualists of the Indians? Well, you call them shamans. Really? No, you don't. That's what people are labeling them as, once again, like the term witch, because they're taking the term shaman and they're butchering it. And let me go into why with that. And that has some origin. That I have definitely been able to find some more concrete evidence towards. First of all, Native Americans is a very generic term which is more appropriate than Indian. The Native American tribes...
Do you want white rice?
Well, yes, please.
Okay.
The Native American tribes all had their own name and language. You know, the Sioux, the Blackfoot, the Crow, the Delaware. There's tons of tribes. Not tons, but there's a lot. I don't know all of the tribes. I've done very little. You know, I'm once again limited on my resources from conversations and forums and chats and gatherings and groups and whatnot. So I'm limited on my knowledge. But what I do know, speaking with actual Native Americans, is that each of them have their own language. The name shaman does not come from any of their languages. The name shaman comes from Siberia, and it was also utilized by the Russians. Shaman or shaman was their term for their spiritual, like, priest people, that the term eventually came to be applied to anyone who communicates with the spirit world. It became a very generic term. But at one time, it was a specific path. This was shamanism. This was shaman. This is what made a shaman. That's been erased and deleted, and that's what's happening to witches today and witchcraft. It's being deleted. It's becoming a generic label that someone just slaps on themselves. Now, these tribal Americans, you know, they had... Talking to the one individual, I want to say he was Cherokee or Sioux. And I can't remember, and I apologize. And I'm not going to say his name, just for the simple fact that I didn't ask him to say his name, so I'm going to keep, you know, his business. But what he told me is he said they didn't have names for their spiritual practitioners. The people that we would label as shaman, they didn't have that. In these Native American tribal societies, they didn't have names for what they did. They just did it. You knew everyone in your tribe. You knew who did what. You knew who hunted and who gathered and who led the tribe and who led the spiritual, you know, religious aspects of it. You know, who did the healing and who helped birth, you know, the children and who gathered food. You knew what they did, so they didn't need a title to distinguish each other like us as Americans or, you know, other people around the world. We have to be labeled as something. They didn't have labels. That was very inspiring, by the way, and also I don't consider myself to have a label. When I heard someone else say it, that just reinforced that theology in my mind for my personal path. That was just reinforcement. Sorry, allergies and... But, so, they didn't have names. Actually, I think this individual that I spoke with, he would be the equivalent of what he called the white man would call a shaman or a shaman. And he said that in his tribe and in his village, because he was raised, it was passed down as a tradition. He is an actual shaman. He's not just a self-proclaimed, I read a book, I'm a shaman. He was an actual trained shaman. And he said that that's the term that he's used on occasion to satisfy, what are you? Well, he's himself. What are you? Okay, well, fine, I'm a shaman. Okay. He, in his tribe and his culture and his religion and all that good stuff, translating it roughly into English, he said it would be the equivalent of what's called a pipe maker. Now, for those of you who practice such traditions, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But that's a big difference between using a Siberian word for, people that had nothing to do with it. So, shamanism and shaman and mage and, hermetic mage, magician, sorcerer, witch, and, a lot of these different terms here, they're all spiritual. They're spiritualists. They're different than religions such as, Shintoist, Catholic, Taoist. Actually, even Taoist and Buddhist are separate for some of the religious ones. They're a different type of mixture between religion and spirituality, but I'll get into that at a later date and time. And I've touched upon it in a couple of my videos anyway. But, Wiccan and Druids and Druidry and Protestants and Catholics and Jehovah's Witnesses and, Promise Keepers and Baptists, and I could go on and on and on. There's tons of religions out there. My point is that there's a difference between the religions and the spiritualists, and witchcraft and witches are on the spiritualist side. They're over there with the mages. They're over there, on that spectrum of the great wheel of path and practice, and whatnot. So let's start finally talking about what I think a witch is. Think a witch is. Not what a witch is. What I think a witch is. Because I am not a witch. Do I know some witchcraft? Yes. Do I practice some witchcraft? Yes. Do I consider myself a witch? Hell no. I was never formally trained. I did not learn enough in any book, any website, any gathering, any conversation to be, it's nasty, but self-deluded enough to call myself a witch. And that's a very nasty way of saying it. I also don't limit myself to one path. I actually had someone make a comment about how, well, I can still be a witch and not limit myself to one path. You know what? You're right. You can be whatever you want and do whatever you want. But, because I'm expressing my personal opinion, being a witch and then including tons of different magical practices together, and I don't mean, religions, because, like I said, witchcraft is not a religion itself. It would be the equivalent, and I'm going to use religion as an example, of someone trying to be a Catholic and simultaneously being a Jehovah's Witness. You're going to get some crossfire. You're no longer pure in your tradition. Look at Hindus and Hinduism. They don't look at other stuff. They don't incorporate practices from other faiths. Now, granted, there's going to be individuals that are exceptions to that rule, but they are Hindu. They live, breathe, eat, and shit this stuff. It's what they are. Usually, it's very cultural. It's they don't need anything else. Look at the Norse tribes, back when they were polytheistic, the heathens. They didn't even have a name for their tradition, and besides for a satru. A satru is a common name for the revival of the religions of the North, but they just...
They eat shit and breathe it.
Yes, that's true. I'm glad you're amused. Thank you for interrupting my video again. She likes that because she's studying Hinduism. But you know that because you've seen my Hindu video. So, yeah, and she just still doesn't call herself one. One of the main practices my wife's doing right now is Hinduism, but she doesn't call herself a Hindu. She includes it as a mix. What was the mix you said for your funny title?
I'm a Egyptian Buddhist Hindi.
An Egyptian
Buddhist turning Hindu.
An Egyptian Buddhist turning Hindu. And
With some pagan-y stuff.
Mixed with some pagan-y stuff. Because she's done different stuff, but she was just trying to be funny. The point is, for us, and it works for us, we don't use labels. So, with witchcraft, when you start mixing all this other stuff in, you're taking away from what it is. And now you have all these people sitting out there, including some of you watching this video, where you don't know what the fuck witchcraft is anymore. You don't know what a witch is. And most of us don't anymore because it's been so muddled and watered down. If you water something down with other stuff, sure. Do I think you should include stuff and grow? Absolutely. The Shaolin are a prime example of that. The Shaolin of today, what's left, the remnants of it, is incorporating the martial arts and spiritual practice of what they learned from Hinduism, from Buddhism came from India, Hinduism and stuff like that, and they have some of their local traditions and folk religions of China, such as Taoism, and they, Confucianism, and they mixed all these theories and philosophies together, and all the martial arts that were developed, they developed new martial arts to grow, and they accepted outside ones, like some of the internal martial arts. That's practiced now with some of the Shaolin. So it's good to expand and grow, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, but once you lose and completely got away from what the base was, if you go over to the Shaolin Temple, though they included other practices, they will tell you where they came from, and there are some specifications to become a Shaolin. You don't just pick up a book or look online or take a few classes and call yourself Shaolin. I mean, I guess you can, once again, you can call yourself whatever you want, but there's a big difference between claiming it and becoming it. So, many of you said that you can become a witch through time, practice, experience. Yes, completely agree. Can you become a witch by being self-taught? I don't see why you couldn't. But there's a difference between putting your time in and putting some honest research out there. I mean, you might say, well, I don't have the resources, and I don't have the books, and I don't have a teacher. So what? Then why do you want to be a witch? What do you gain by claiming a title that you just told me you don't have the resources to become? What do you gain? You can still be you. You can still be a very potent, powerful individual. You can have a strong foundation spiritual path that you make up as you go. And that's the most powerful religion out there. The religion of self. The path of self. The spirituality of self. The practice of self. You want to develop your own magic and stuff like that, more power to you. But if you want to become a witch, to me, in my opinion, a witch specifically practices witchcraft. That's what makes a witch a witch. That is the definition of a witch to me. Someone who practices witchcraft. So how do you learn witchcraft? That's my next point of what makes a witch a witch. A witch is not a religion, or a religious person, even though they can include religion with them. But a witch is a practitioner of witchcraft. Witchcraft is not a religion. Those are the two parts of the definition of what is a witch, in my opinion, and what I think a witch is. In order to learn witchcraft, I feel you need to do it from a witch. A hereditary tradition is always going to be more potent and powerful than a book tradition, because the book is not enough. If you had a library that was 30, 50, 60 volumes from the same person, the same practices, the same teachings, okay, fine. Perfectly good to use that resources. But I'm telling you, from my experience and from people I've spoken with, from the witches that I met, it's not enough for one book. It's not enough to say, well, this kind of fits, that kind of fits. A witch is someone who connects with the primal forces of the earth. Now, what do I mean by connects? Witches have the ability to commune with the natural primal forces. Primal forces, as in the driving force of love, which is why there's always the association with love spells and blah, blah, blah. One of the myths and rumors, just because they can associate with it or hate great deep emotions, primal instincts of animals, etc. This has given many witches the ability to commune with nature, to commune with animals. Thus, the association with most of them being polytheistic. They're connected with the earth, whether it's born and hereditary or taught to them from the bloodline that they grew up in or been initiated into. Sometimes you have it born in you, sometimes you're taught in it. So you can have a natural powers that would make you a likely candidate to become a witch. Many of the family traditions started because they had natural abilities and primal forces that they were able to connect with, that they became a witch because they were called a witch. And if they were somewhere else, like in Siberia, they'd be called a shaman. Or if, just whatever region that they went to, they would take on the association of sorcerer or magician or mage or, whatever the case may be. They would take on that title because they were called it commonly because the individuals of that area didn't know what else to call them, so they would refer to them as their wise one, as their wise individual that they would go to. A witch is someone who is able to communicate with nature, who can touch the primal forces, work with and direct the primal forces through will, that also is able to work with the natural elements such as herbalism and alchemy and things like that. This is what a witch is. Understanding the properties of nature. They're both, what is considered modern science today. A witch also follows a specific set of oaths. A witch is not only trained, but they are part of what's called a coven. Now, coven has been used and applied to many different things before. A coven, with their oaths and traditions, keep their secrets. Each of the families of witches would develop their secrets and keep them in their grimoire. A lot of people are calling the book today a Book of Shadows. That's something more recent. I don't have a lot of references to a Book of Shadows. It was just a book. They didn't have to have a special name for it. It was a journal. It was a family diary, a book of spells, a book of how the primal energies work and how their family tapped into them. Very similar to martial arts practice. Wong family, Chen family. Each of the families had their own style. Yang family spear. Their tradition, it was all martial arts, very broad generic term, but there were specifics. Witchcraft and witches in this particular region of the world, over there in Europe, it was a term that was utilized for their wise folk that had to do with communing with nature. The equivalent of what some people imagine a shaman is. Can you do that and become that on your own? Yes. There's a big difference, though, in becoming wise and letting it soak into your bones, as well as learning it, which expedites and make it more fine-tuned, than it is to just want to be it. So, once again, touching upon definitions, half-hour video. You asked me, I told you it's a long explanation. A witch is someone who practices witchcraft. Witchcraft is not a religion. Witchcraft is taught by another witch. Witch is someone who belongs to a coven. A coven is either a bloodline family or a group of very close friends who have spiritual blood ties, and they swear oaths. A witch is someone who communicates with the primal forces of nature, including animals and trees and plants, and has the ability to work with them in forms of alchemy and herbalisms, etc. This is what a witch is from my experience, from my knowledge, from what I've read in books, read on the internet, spoken to actual witches on the little that they would share, and from gatherings and groups and workshops, etc., 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 and friends that I've spoken with through chats, through instant messages, through... So, once again, not an expert, but this is what I've been presented with the 17 years of searching. And I will tell you right now, with witches, they are extremely secretive on their traditions. They will not let you look at their book of spells. One of them was probably close to my best friend. She would not even let me glance at it. They're that secretive. Actually, she wouldn't even tell me where the book was kept. 7 generations this book has been written in. Never had a chance to physically see it myself. But her mother, grandmother could all swear to its existence. And that, knowing someone like that, to me, that was what a witch is. If you're a witch and a self-proclaimed witch, and even if you've spent the last 10, 15 years calling yourself a witch and becoming what your idea of a witch is, that's fine. You just started a new family tradition, technically, which might die with you, might get passed on. It's what they did with shaman. They're tacking it on and labeling it, and you're starting to lose what it is. If you have done your research and you know what it is and you're doing the best you can with what you have, I'm not telling you to stop. I'm not telling you you're not a witch. I'm just telling you, because of, Nice Linguist's question, what my feelings on what a witch is and what I define a witch as. This is what I define it as. And like I said, none of us really know. I mean, we're talking about stuff that have been passed by word of mouth or through books. There's no way of knowing. We weren't alive during that time period. That's why I don't call myself anything. I'm making my own path. I'm taking what pieces I can, I'm mixing them together, doing my best to get their history and origin to give respect where respect is due, but I'm me. I'm my own person, and I'm not going to limit myself. And the other thing I wanted to tell you about witches, aside from being extremely secretive, and by the way, there's arguments on the term warlock. Warlock is not a male witch, although supposedly there is a term in Scottish language that sounds very close to warlock, which is supposed to be a male practitioner of witchcraft. I'm not going to argue that, because once again, you take it from a different language, and it's no longer the term witch or witchcraft. You're starting to muddle the lines again. But a warlock was an individual who broke their oaths to their coven, and they would usually be hunted down and killed. They're very serious and strict about it. Any authentic, or what I consider to be authentic witch, will not tolerate the sharing of their secrets. They will not have it put out there and shared with the world. And if you wanted to become into it, first of all, it'd take you forever to get in good with the family. It can take years before they would even trust you to initiate you. And their type of initiation, it depends on the family. I mean, there could be blood involved, there could be blindfolds involved, there could be trials and tests involved. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could potentially be involved. Also, as far as abilities and powers, it depends on the family and the tradition. Each one of them has different stuff, and some of it sounds what people would term as supernatural, and it seems very out of this world, but to them it's normal, which I think is funny that there's been a lot of people who I've heard claim that they're witches, and they freak out when something happens. You're playing with primal forces and powers trying to become something, and something happens and you freak out about it? Well, weren't you trying to get something to happen? So it's just, people seem to play too much, and it tends to frustrate me. And so that's witches and witchcraft. And like I said, that's my understanding. And I was going there with another thought, which is why I'm pausing and stuttering and repeating myself as I was trying to get to another point. I really should take notes before I make videos. But with witchcraft, if you're practicing witchcraft, and this is why I've had those arguments with a couple people about, well, they say, well, I do witchcraft and I do other stuff as well, but I'm a witch. That's fine, but what I consider an authentic witch wouldn't stand for that. Not only are there oaths that you swear into, but you are a witch. That is all you are. If you're going to follow the path of the witch, you are a witch. There is no other else. And terms like meditation, although might be used, they do something different that's similar to it. There is a path of what's called journeying inward, according to one group in Coven, but there's other terms for it that they use, and a lot of them don't have names because they don't need names. You are taught the practice, not the name necessarily. It depends, once again, on who you talk to, and because I've never been inside the covens, because I'm not going to swear myself to one coven, I'm not going to become a witch or take those oaths, thus I'm stuck on the outside. Same thing with the Freemasons. You can't get inside the Freemasons without swearing into them and keeping things secret. You can't go up through the ranks. You are a Mason or you're not a Mason. Same thing applies to Taoists. There's a difference between a public form of Taoism and there's an actual Taoist who is the closed form Taoist priest. That's the way I separate it in my mind, that there's the public form of Taoism, those who follow the concept of what they believe Tao is, and those who follow Taoist practices. There was an individual I spoke to, and he actually started a new lineage from what he was taught, and he gave it a new name because he was incorporating some new practices and making it different. and he will not teach you. And he will teach you if you pay him, and he will initiate you and give you lesson by lesson and lesson. It takes a few years. Once again, not going to fit in one book. A few years, and he'll work with you, but you have to swear off all other things. You have to give up all faiths, all practices, all forms of magic, and practice only his tradition. And that, although a Taoist is not a witch, is the same thing with witchcraft. You are going to follow their tradition. You don't get to hop covens. You don't get to do different paths. You don't get to do one family of witchcraft and their family. If you do witchcraft...
No, you've reached an answering machine because you couldn't answer. Either that, or we're just staring at the answer machine laughing at you.
Yes, that's my answering machine in a voice, Scottish-like accent. Anyway, witches are not going to tolerate multiple family traditions. There's sometimes rivals between families, and there will be subtle variations. Now, here's the thing. Because witches have to do with the primal forces and elements, there's the assumptions that are often made, such as the ritual tools, the athame and wand and chalice and either a pentacle disc or a stone, depending on which group or coven you talk to that practices Wicca. Those are not witchcraft tools. Those are Wiccan tools. Those are... Druids have different tools, but they're similar. There are tools like that in different religions, but that's not a witchcraft thing. Are there witches that use that stuff? Absolutely. But that's not a witchcraft thing. The 4 elements and things like that, that's not a witchcraft thing. The witches, although some covens might associate it with particular ones, the witches themselves, like I said, work with the primal forces. Once you start getting into variations beyond the definition I gave you, that's what differs one family practice from another. But because it's so closely related, because a witch has used a wand before, there's these associations that that's what witchcraft is. And you could do all the stuff that I just mentioned. Why do I not consider that to be a witch, in my opinion or my definition? Because you don't have the coven. You don't have the knowledge passed down. You're not going through the initiations. So maybe today that there is a public form of witch. And that's what a lot of you are that are watching this. Or a lot of the people that you know that claim the witch title. So... okay, start hitting the dislikes, turn off my video, blah, 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 leave your nasty comments. Express your opinion, as I'm doing, at least slightly politely, and say, start out your message with something along the lines of, in my practice or in my experience. Try to be at least a little kind about it, or when you make your video response, say, I understand that Blaze has his stuff that he learned, but I don't agree with him because, or I don't think he's right because, or I disagree with him because. Try to at least be semi-civil, because I know that there are going to be some of you who fall into my definition of what is an authentic witch, and you are going to be doing one of two things. You are either going to be applauding and saying, thank you for setting the record straight. Some of you might be like, it's still sharing a little bit too much of our secrets there. Keep it on the down low, okay? Some of you might be actually a little mad or offended. And then the other ones of you who are a self-proclaimed witch, a book witch, kitchen witch, white witch. I'll do a video on why I have issues with the term white witch later. But, you might be one of those self-proclaimed witches, self-taught witches, solitary witches, whatever the case may be. And you might be very upset or offended by this whole video. You might be fuming like, who are you? And I've already said it. I'm nobody. That's who I am. I'm sharing my opinion. I have the right to do so, and so do you. You don't have to go by my terms or definitions. You don't have to hold anything I said in this entire video as anything more than horseshit. But, like I said, 17 years of research through books, internet gathering, websites, friends, get-togethers, chats, IMs, emails, instant messages. This is what I've come to understand is what a witch is. Leave your comments. Do some video responses. Do your best not to be too nasty. I understand if you want to get a little bit irked, you can hear me getting a little worked up over it. And that's why I avoid stuff like this. usually. I avoid giving my direct opinion and be very subtle because I'm a human being. I'm opinionated. I have an opinion that people are not going to agree with. I don't share my personal practice because I don't feel it's for everyone. It's my personal thing. So same thing happens with opinions and stuff like this. So I take this very personally. I'm kind of putting myself out there. And a lot of you are seeing a different side of me. You're used to seeing BlazeLeeDragon, who casually talks about things and gives you stuff to research. Now you're seeing BlazeLeeDragon, who's giving you a very biased opinion and kind of setting stuff on the table as is. But, I'm not going to force you to take it. Take it or leave it. Do what you want with it. I think I've rambled on enough. 45 minutes. If you're still sitting here and watching this, I applaud you. You have way more patience than I do. So, enjoy. I hope you learned something. I hope you take these things into some consideration. I guess that's all. So, blessings to you, and may your path be fruitful. And if you have further questions that I can rattle on or ramble on about, please ask them, and I will make a video response. So, enjoy.